evening and welcome to PBS Fort Wayne. The name of our show is Life Ahead for a good reason. PBS, of course, has a goal always of educating, entertaining, and informing you, and that's what this show does. It's called Life Ahead because we have different topics every Wednesday, and the things that we talk about are things that might help you as you make choices in your life ahead. Tonight's a legal show. Keep that in mind as you're watching. The phone number's right there on the screen and will appear periodically here in the next half hour. And if you have a legal question, we have the person that can give you an answer, and that's Bryan Nugen. Welcome him. He's with us. You've been with us every month for a long time.
I have.
And I will say right now, Bryan, I looked it up before the show. You'll be back again next month on the 16th,
okay.
March 16th.
I look forward to it already.
Third Wednesday.
Fantastic.
Okay, see, I always know before he does.
It's true. I just look at my calendar. Tonight's Life Ahead.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. Well, tonight we're going to be talking about what to do when a loved one passes.
Sure.
It's hard to know what to do.
Yep.
You know, to begin with, you're grieving, you're in
Yep.
shock, you're in denial. I mean, you're going through a whole lot.
That's true.
But there are some steps or processes or things you need to take care of. Let's start with what should you do first, Bryan, if someone in your family dies and you're the maybe
part of
you
the
are
family.
or are not, but the
Yep.
main person, but you're in the family.
I would say, to your earlier point, Sandy, I think that take time to grieve, frankly.
Yeah.
There is nothing wrong with taking a beat and recognizing and appreciating the life of the person that just passed. And I think that's the first thing to focus on. Sometimes I'll get calls very shortly after someone has passed, or I'm sure other attorneys get calls very shortly after a client has passed from loved ones or folks that are interested in the estate of the deceased. And I always say, there's no rush to tackle anything. Take a moment, figure out what's going on, figure out your family dynamics, and when you're ready, then come and visit with your attorney and speak with him about what steps that you should be taking after you've gotten through that initial process, that shock that you were kind of referencing before, Sandy. So number one is just take care of yourself. Take care of yourself.
Okay.
Yeah.
What period of time should you take or could you take before it's a problem?
Well, I think the first thing would be our creditors, if there are ongoing debts to be paid, have arrangements been made for those ongoing debts to be satisfied. My experience has been that if creditors are aware that someone has passed, they typically will work with you to some degree to make sure that you have an opportunity to get yourself together and you have an opportunity to figure out what's going on. When we're talking about opening estates and so forth, that process depends upon if there are beneficiaries designated on assets or if there are not beneficiaries designated on assets. But oftentimes what we talk about are some very practical things. So if we know that a death is impending, we know that someone may be passing in the near future. If you have a power of attorney in place for that individual, what you might consider doing is changing the mailing address of that individual and for it to be coming to a different address. If you aren't there local, if you aren't right there and able to get the mail on a daily, on a very regular basis so we don't miss something, you might consider using that power of attorney at the post office and changing the address so that you don't miss a bill when it becomes due, you don't miss a statement for something when it becomes due. Perhaps there's a mortgage statement being sent to the house, and if you didn't have that mail forwarded, you wouldn't recognize it. So sometimes we consider forwarding the mail to an individual that's going to be responsible for the estate of the deceased. So that's one of the first things you may do, not after the person has passed, but slightly before the person may be passing. If you need to forward the mail after the time that the person has passed, the post office requires that you actually open an estate, and then they see the letters that have been issued by the court saying that you have the ability to forward the mail. So it sounds it's a very practical suggestion.
You can't just yourself go to the post office and say, hey, I want to get so-and-so's mail now.
You cannot. Sometimes the post office will permit that. They're really not supposed to permit that. Sometimes they'll permit if they know you and they're familiar with the family, etc. But the post office is supposed to require a power of attorney in advance of someone passing, or actual letters from the court where you've been appointed as the personal representative to be able to forward that mail. So it's a very practical thing, but sometimes the mail is missed. Bill is, we didn't pay a bill, we didn't get all the paperwork we needed before filing taxes, something like that.
Well, and you may not know everything that,
Right.
that let's say it's your father,
Yep.
whatever. You may not know what bills your father would be expecting. You may not know he has a magazine subscription,
Yep.
or that he has cable, or
Yep.
you know what other bills might be coming.
Sure. So in order to, you need to find those statements that are coming in. So if you're seeing the newspaper coming in or you're seeing a magazine subscription coming in, you should make a note of that. So we're going to want to cancel those magazine subscriptions. The estate actually can get a credit for the amount that was overpaid on that subscription. So, yep, you're exactly right, Sandy. This time of year, especially if it's tax season and you're getting W-2s, you're getting 1099s, you can start to find out what assets that are out there so that you'll know if we need to open an estate, if there were enough assets in that individual's name that merits opening an estate in Indiana over $100,000 in their name without beneficiaries, that if we start gathering those 1099s, we see the assets are out there, and then we know that, yep, we have more than $100,000 that didn't have a beneficiary on it, we need to open an estate. We also may be looking at those 1099s, and if it indicates that those assets were in the name of a trust, we know that we may not need to open an estate, at least for those assets.
Yeah.
So checking the mail actually is something that's very important to do, and it educates you. Just like you're saying, you're maybe learning about things that you didn't know about your father, your mother, your
Right.
brother, your sister. I didn't realize they had this account. I didn't
Yeah.
realize they had this life insurance policy.
Well, you mentioned getting 1099s and things for taxes.
Yep.
Do you have to do anything about that?
Of course, yeah. So you would owe, the deceased would still have a tax obligation for the time
Sure.
between they passed, rather the first of the year and the day in the year in which they passed. You wouldn't address that until the next year. But if their prior year taxes hadn't been paid, of course, you would be responsible for making sure that their prior year taxes are paid. A personal tax return is filed both on the federal level and the state level, assuming they make enough money to do that. But of course, yeah, taxes would need to be paid.
So you want to make sure you're saving, and getting. Let's say you've changed at the post office and you're getting their mail. Save the 1099s or anything that has to do with
Yes.
taxes, because at some point you'll have to yourself, or I mean the person responsible financially, will have to go and have those taxes done.
Right. So they would gather all of that just like we would for ourselves. We would gather all of that, bring that to a tax preparer, CPA, and have them prepare a tax return on behalf of the deceased.
But it may give, talking about things you might not know, getting these tax notices, you may find out that he has some investments at a bank you didn't know anything about.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So the beginning of the year is a great time to find that out because those 1099s are being issued. So that
Okay.
will give you an idea about what's out there and what assets may be in place.
I'm going to back up a little
Sure.
bit, and we're talking as if the person has passed away, and what do you do, and how do you take care of everything? Let's back up to before the person passes, and what you should do. And this is an emotional
It is.
conversation,
without
an
a doubt.
emotional time. But what are some things to focus on?
I think first is if you can have a discussion with the loved one, if you can have a discussion with them, find out if they have any estate planning in place. Is there a will out there? Is there a trust out there? And do they have something called testamentary capacity so that they can sign those instruments, and if they don't have those in place? If they don't have those items in place, are you able to discuss with the person where is it they're wanting those assets to go? So using that power of attorney I was referencing before, if you're able to designate beneficiaries on particular accounts to recognize how that person wants their estate to be distributed, that may be a conversation that you have with the individual. Also, for funeral planning, does the person have funeral planning in place? Do they not have funeral planning in place? Have a sincere conversation with them. What would you like to see take place? Do we want a traditional burial? Do you want a calling? Do you not want a calling? Do you want a cremation? Is there something special that you want to have done? Have that discussion so that you know in your heart what it is that individual wanted, and you can implement that by using things like the power of attorney, the healthcare representative designation. Those forms would allow you to assist that person in making those funeral plans.
Yeah.
If they've prepaid for their funeral, then we want to know,
You want to know that
where it was,
they have.
where it was, how it was handled. Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
you know what funeral home to contact at the time of the person's passing, so that you're making sure that those things are taken care of in the way that they wanted them to be taken care of. If they haven't done that, Is it appropriate to prepay at that time and pre-plan at that time? Sometimes folks will pre-plan for their funeral, so they know what funeral home they're going to be using, but they didn't prepay for it. And that's all right, but we would want to know where they did that pre-planning so that if you were assisting them or assisting the family in making those funeral arrangements, you would know who to call, of course, to take the body, and then to put in place the funeral arrangements they had planned. And the estate would be responsible for.
Do you have to know right away when someone passes what funeral home to call, or,
It would be
what
best.
you're going to do?
It would be best. They can hold the body, as macabre as that sounds. They can hold the body for a period of time, but you
Who
would
can?
want.
Where does it go?
At the hospital.
This is terrible. I'm so sorry I'm asking you
That's
questions
okay.
that are difficult. But
So the hospital can hold the body for a period of time.
Okay.
Yeah, and funeral homes can hold the body for a period of time as well.
Okay.
But so that's why I'm saying to you, Sandy, if you can have the conversation with the individual, if you have the luxury of time, have
Yeah.
that conversation. What I would suggest if you don't have the luxury of time, you didn't have that conversation for whatever reason, the person was uncomfortable talking about it, or it was an unexpected passing we hadn't been able to plan for, speak with your family members. And what is it that did they talk to you about what they wanted to have done? So that you're, again, honoring that person and recognizing what it is that they wanted to have
well,
done.
I appreciate that you're, telling us some of those things. And I think what's important to remember is that these are hard things to talk about. And especially, I think, for the older generation, everything was kept pretty quiet, and you didn't talk about your feelings, you didn't talk about your estate planning, you didn't talk about your finances. So then all of a sudden, the kids are left trying to figure out, what do you want? What do we think you want? So you maybe have to be the one that starts with the parent or grandparent or whomever has passed away. You may have to start the conversation of asking them, where would you like to go on,
Sure.
How do you want?
My experience has been that the more senior the person is, it's not as likely that they would have talked about some of those types of things.
I think that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
that older
I do find
generation.
over time now that people are more comfortable talking about those things. They recognize that it's a natural part of life and it's not necessarily something to be feared. And I think that when you've had that open, honest discussion, you can be very comfortable that you're putting into effect what it is that that person wanted.
Yeah.
And if you have the opportunity to get those documents signed in advance, the will, the trust, power of attorney, healthcare rep designation, by all means get those things in place. It will make the process so much easier for everyone, open doors for you. So I would encourage everyone to have those in place, for sure.
Durable power of attorney.
Yep.
What do you have to do, to make that
Right.
legally correct?
Well, you have to be of age and
18 above?
18, and I think there's an exception if you're serving in the Merchant Marine, something like that.
I'm not.
I don't intend to either, but have to have testamentary capacity, meaning you understand who it is that you're appointing
Okay.
to perform those certain duties, and it needs to be signed, needs to be notarized. So it's really a very straightforward thing. I encourage everybody to have one, even kids that are going off to college. As a parent, you're going to want that in place. It's a good thing to have in place.
Okay.
Yep.
How much should you, we talked about what's a difficult conversation, with that older generation.
Sure.
What are some ways you can bring up some of these things that you're going to eventually need to
Right.
know, but you don't want to make them too uncomfortable?
I encourage folks to talk about it when they're in a pleasant setting. So as opposed to waiting for there to be a negative event happening or something that was unplanned, have a conversation when you're at a family gathering, at a cookout, so that it's a normal part of discussion. And it isn't something to be feared. We're all aging, and I think it's a healthy and appropriate discussion to have. And frankly, the person that may be a little uncomfortable with them, having those conversations, what you're giving to the person that you're having the conversation with is a gift. You're letting them know what you want, and you're removing guilt from them so that they don't have to make decisions in a vacuum, not knowing what it is that you did or didn't want to have take place.
Yeah.
So I would have the conversation in a setting that's comfortable, that's not tension-filled, and if, assuming that folks in the family get along, for everybody in the family to be aware of that conversation. Tensions run high and anxiety runs high if we're dealing with end-of-life decisions, And so I encourage those conversations when you don't have that tension. And for everybody in the family to be aware of the discussion. Sometimes folks that aren't necessarily around may have I talked to Mom 5 years ago and I have the impression she wanted this or this, but Mom's changed her mind. She doesn't want to do that anymore. So if we have those ongoing discussions, then at least everybody's in the same place at the same time and reading from the same page.
I like that you said ongoing.
Yeah.
I've heard of cases and situations, and as an attorney, maybe you have too, where the siblings don't agree. I mean, like maybe the one said, yeah, well, Mom told me this 5 years ago.
Right.
And they're adamant that's what Mom wants.
Or Mom said, I get the house. You get the house.
Mom said, I can have all the jewelry, all the cash.
And Mom may have said that. That may be true.
Yeah.
But without that being in writing, without that being memorialized, you're setting up a very uncomfortable situation for family members if they have a different opinion about how that should be addressed. One of the questions that sometimes comes up for me with clients when they come into my office, and certain other attorneys as well, is what happens to Social Security? How do we let Social Security know that Mom has passed, and how does that work? Actually, the funeral home is responsible for telling Social Security that the individual has passed, and so that you don't have a duty. It used to be years ago, you would have to contact Social Security, let them know that the person had passed. Social Security then would ask for the money back that they had paid. You don't see that as much anymore. Social Security is paid actually in arrears, and you don't get the Social Security for the month in which you passed. So sometimes Social Security will say, we've paid, and we're going to want some of that back. And they literally can go into the account and draw it. So if we draw the money out of that account too quickly after someone's passed away, there isn't money there for Social Security to draw, but the estate still has a duty to reimburse Social Security. But no duty to call Social Security. The funeral home will do that on your behalf. That's part of their obligation.
What else do they take care of, the funeral home?
They'll order death certificates. And
that has to be signed by a doctor, is that correct?
Yes, the county coroner, if I'm not mistaken, is the one that signs off that, or their representative. But what I will say about practicality of death certificates, you can order as many as you want. However, anymore, you don't necessarily need an original death certificate every time you're gaining access to an account. There was a time when we would use original death certificates, and they would go out to the different companies, banks and credit unions, and to your brokers and to insurance companies. Oftentimes now we're able to use copies of death certificates and not originals. So I normally encourage people, order 2 or 3 death certificates. You may only need to have one, actually. But don't go crazy ordering 15 death certificates, 20 death certificates.
Because there's a charge.
There's a charge for those.
There's a charge for it.
So if you can keep your expenses a little bit lower, I would encourage you to do that and not order a dozen death certificates.
But you might need one or a copy. To take to the bank. If
you're going to
settle
You're going to at least need to have one original, and normally they'll make a copy of it, or you can deliver to them a copy.
Okay.
That's right.
All right.
It used to be years ago we would need originals for everything. We don't necessarily need originals anymore.
Tell me if I'm right. We talked about Social Security. Let's say the husband passes away, leaving his wife, and she also gets Social Security.
So she should So she should talk to the Social Security office about, assuming that his Social Security payments were higher than hers.
Then she
should talk to the Social Security office about getting his benefits. And even if there was a divorce, if you were married for a period of time, Social Security will still allow you to collect the higher Social Security amount. And even if the individual was married on more than one occasion, more than one person may be drawing from that Social Security amount. So
How can you do that?
Go to the Social Security office and let them know you were married for a period of time.
More than one person might be drawing on it. How can you do that?
No,
or in what situation?
Well, we don't make the decision. Social Security is the one that determines who gets the money. But if I'm not mistaken, there's a 10-year requirement of marriage. You need to go to the Social Security office when the person has passed in order to claim your benefits as a surviving, or rather as a spouse of that individual. Even if there was a divorce, you still are able to go and get benefits. Yep.
Okay.
I've seen a situation where an individual was married, had a divorce, married another individual. The second person passed, but actually the benefits from the first spouse were higher. And so they went back and claimed the benefits from the first spouse and not the second spouse.
It's just so complicated. But it's good to know that that is certainly an option.
Look
and
for
a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah, look for your benefits for sure. The surviving spouse should check with Social Security and see if there are benefits that are available to them and if they're able to receive a higher Social Security payment. For sure.
Okay. All right. So hopefully you've talked then with your family about what you would like.
Yep.
I will say, Bryan, I've also heard of situations, not only the older generation, or the older they are, the more private they are,
Yep.
but I've also heard that they not only are they uncomfortable talking about it, but if they try to talk to their kids, the kids don't want to hear about it because they don't want to even think about their parents being immortal.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, and I have seen that. It makes children uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I think that if you're having that ongoing conversation, if you make it a normal part of your discourse, it isn't something that is a foreign topic whatsoever.
Yeah.
It makes it much more easy for the family to have the conversation. But as a child, right, we love our parents. We don't want to see anything bad happen to them. It's difficult to see your parents age and become more infirm over time, without a doubt. But I think that we owe it to them and to ourselves and to our siblings and other loved ones to have those conversations and make sure that everybody is on the same page.
Yeah.
If people become sometimes challenged when they know that they may be inheriting some money, they may be receiving some funds, and so there can be tension in the family about what should be happening. So whatever you can do to avoid that and keep everybody friendly for a long period of time, I would encourage those conversations. Yeah.
Well, if you're talking about it with your kids or your family, what are some things that you should let them know? If they don't want to verbally talk about it at the time, can you say, okay, when I die, in my office there's a purple folder and it has my will and this and this and this, so that they know where to go for that information?
Yeah, I recommend that people keep their estate planning documents, those end-of-life documents, in a safe place, but not necessarily a safety deposit box. Someplace that you can get to and it's easily available for the family. If it's in the bank and it's locked up, it's not quite as convenient, and there's a process to open that box that we may not want to go through. So I would encourage folks to, like you're saying, Sandy, have a purple folder or a blue folder where all of my estate planning documents are located. Let your loved ones know where they are. Even to the point earlier where we were talking about the mail, having, scouring through the mail and seeing the 1099s. My gosh, if you have a filing cabinet or wherever you keep your important papers at home, where you have monthly statements that have been coming out, life insurance policies, those are always tricky to, I shouldn't say always, oftentimes are tricky to get those cashed out. If you can gather those things together for your loved ones, if they don't want to have the conversation with you, excellent suggestion, Sandy. At least point them to where they are in the house, where they are in a particular drawer, so they can find everything. Sometimes I'll see folks that have checking accounts at multiple banks and multiple credit unions, and if you have the ability prior to passing to start gathering those together and at least getting them in one neat spot, I would encourage folks to do that. If you know that death is impending and you have that power of attorney in place, you may consider yourself going around and collecting the funds from those various accounts and starting to put them in one spot. Not to take it out of the account, but just to collect it so it's much more convenient to distribute at the time of passing.
Okay, last question.
Yeah.
And we only have about a minute or so left, Bryan. In this world now, social media, and we have accounts, or we have Facebook, we have social email. What kind of information should we leave for our kids in terms of passwords and accounts?
Well, if you're it's fantastic if you have a list of your passwords that you can give to your children so they can go in and close those accounts out. Most people don't. I don't know that I have memorized all of my passwords. Most people don't. But in those documents that you're preparing power of attorney, you may want to include language that says you have access to the social media of this individual.
Okay.
I will say over time, those social media sites have also become more savvy, recognizing that Facebook page lives on past you and memories may come up and so forth. Do you want those memories to continue coming up? Do you not
Good
want those
point.
memories to continue coming up? Do you want to be reminded that the person has passed on an annual basis? You can memorialize them on those sites. There's a process to do that where people can leave messages, written memorials about the individual, or you can close the account down. But so you should have that language in your POA that allows you to close those accounts out. The accounts also have online, you can access them, letting them know that the person has passed, file a death certificate with them, give them obituary, something like that, to demonstrate the person really has passed.
Okay, all right. It's just really complicated. Okay, I want to remind you all that Bryan's going to be back here on March 19th. And if you have some questions for him, that'll be a good opportunity for you to call in. We have 15 seconds for you to give the last words of best advice you have.
Well, thank you, Sandy, for having me on tonight. I would encourage everybody to get organized, get some of those estate planning documents in place, will, trust, POA, healthcare rep. There's no time to wait for that.
All right, no time to. All right, and again, don't be shy, I think Bryan's saying, in terms of sharing with your children or your siblings what your wishes are. We're going to see you back here next week at 7:30. Good night.
The preceding program on PBS Fort Wayne was made possible in part by
Nugen Law, focusing on estate planning and elder care law, emphasizing independence and quality of life. Serving Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, and Florida. More information at nugenlaw.com.